I've not graded your ledger yet, and I won't grade it till later in the quarter, but I noticed that some of you are not using efficient formulas to automatically calculate your account balances in your ledger, and some of you aren't using formulas at all. While you are not required to use formulas in this class, you would be crazy not to use them for ledger account balances, especially for the cash account since it has so many transactions. So I'm going to show you how. So to get to the general ledger on the table of contents, I'm going to click general ledger. Now notice the general ledger is visible here on this long list of worksheets. I could click general ledger here, but I'm just going to show you how to use this table of contents since you should get used to using it since there's so many worksheets. So I'm going to click on general ledger. It takes us to the top of the general ledger. Notice it says click on an account to jump down to the ledger account. So I'm going to click on cash, or I could just scroll down, but that's inefficient. I'm going to click cash and it brings it up to the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to scroll up and now we can see our cash account. Now what I've done is I've just put in some random debits and credits so we can show you an example of how to calculate the account balance with a formula that works for every cell. So the way a lot of students do it, and it's not efficient, is for this first cell they'll say I'm going to hit an equal, and they take the amount above, the balance above, which is correct, and since a credit subtracts, they'll say minus this $200, and then they hit enter. Now that worked for this balance. But what we want ideally is a formula that we can just copy down by clicking on the bottom right corner and dragging it down. Now let's see if it works. Now notice it didn't work here for this total because it does not take into consideration debits. So this formula is incorrect. So I'm going to undo and then undo that formula. And now I'm going to show you a formula that will work once we copy it down. So what we're going to do is right here in this cell, we're going to say equal, and just like we did previously, you take the balance above, and we're going to add the debit. So I'm going to hit plus, click on the debit cell, and in case there's a credit instead of a debit, we'll say minus, and then we will subtract the credit. So we're taking 1,000 plus a debit if it's there, or minus a credit if it's there. And I hit enter. Now notice that calculated correctly. I'm going to drag it down. We should add 400. That worked. And I'm going to drag it down to the other two. See? That works. Now it's efficient and you don't have to do anything manually and you don't have to do an individual formula for each cell depending on if it's a debit or a credit. Now you might be saying, what if the cash account has a negative balance? Because notice a negative balance would be the credit side. I have no formulas in the credit column. Well, should the cash account ever have a negative balance? No. Could it possibly have a negative balance? In the rare case where the accountant bounces a check, yes, it could have a negative balance. But for this project, we won't ever bounce a check. So you don't have to worry about the cash account having a negative balance in this project. So we don't have to worry about credit balances for accounts that normally have a debit balance. Likewise, all the other accounts in this project will have a normal balance. So this formula will always work. So in other words, accounts receivable will always have a debit balance. And now remember, some accounts, like accounts payable, normally have a credit balance. So this exact formula won't work for accounts payable. The formula would be placed in the credit column instead of the debit column. And with accounts payable, you will be adding credits and subtracting debits. So this formula works for all accounts that have a normal balance. Now there is one account that does not have a normal balance, and that account is income summary. So if you remember income summary, this account here, click on it, it does not have a normal balance on the debit side or a normal balance on the credit side. It could be on either side. So this formula that we just created is not going to work for the debit or the credit column. You will have to do it manually on your own, which is no big deal. But all other accounts that have a normal balance will have the balance on the normal side. Now, if you're working on your ledger and it turns out that one of your accounts does not have a normal balance, such as, let me scroll up to the top by clicking on the back to top link. So then let's go to cash. So remember, cash normally has a debit balance, in other words, a positive balance. So if you're working on this and it turns out that you have a credit balance, that means you've done something wrong and you need to double check your work. Now let's quickly take a look at a sample trial balance. So to get to the trial balances, I'm going to click on Table of Contents. And let's look at trial balance 1. And I put in some random debits and credits here. Now some of you are not using formulas to calculate your total debits and your total credits. You should. You don't have to. I'm not going to mark you off if you're not, but you'd be silly not to use a formula to calculate your total debits. Now for the total debits and credits, you always put it on the last row, on the row after your last account. So capital is my last account. So I'm going to go down here and put the word total for total debits. And it's at the very bottom. I don't think you can see it, so let me scroll up just a little bit. There's total. We put the total label. I'm going to readjust this window. And then for total debits, you're just going to hit equals sum, open parentheses, click on the top account, drag all the way down, let go, close parentheses, hit enter, and there you have 61,000 total debits. I can click Control C to copy, and I can paste it over here, or I can just click and drag it, and my credits equals my debits. Of course, you could always use the sum function up here in the top if you're familiar with that. And that's it.